It was a pretty hard week. It was one of those weeks, those weeks where you just you get to the end of it and you're just like, man, I could have done without that week. That last 5 days, I could take them out of the calendar, never get them back, and I would be just happy. But it was that kind of week. It was a hard week. And on top of it all, we'd lost our soccer game. And when I say lost, we didn't just lose it, we lost it. I won't even give you the score. It was so bad. And so I was feeling pretty down. I was feeling some kind of way. And as we came into practice the day after we had lost that game, I was hoping that our coach would give us one of those nice pep talks that says something like, don't dwell on your loss, don't let that get you down, let's get back into it. So as we filed into the bleachers for the pre-practice meeting that he often did with us, I had hopes that I was going to come out of those bleachers ready to practice and be ready to go. We sat down and he came out on the field and he stood before us and he looked at us and he said, turn around. And we all turned around, and as you can imagine, sitting backwards in bleachers is pretty awkward, and we're sitting there and we're like, what kind of cool coaching rhetoric is this that he's going to use to boost us? And he just said, you disgust me. I don't even want to see your faces. So that framed the rest of our practice. And as you can imagine, practice was not fun. In fact, I don't think we touched a soccer ball the whole practice. We just ran until we puked. But it was pretty obvious within a few seconds of the conversation or the lashing that he gave us that this was going to be that kind of talking to and practice. He framed the conversation in such a way that it prepared us. You guys know that. When somebody comes up to you and say, we need to talk, you know that conversation is going to probably be a hard conversation. If somebody comes up to you and says, knock, knock, you know the rest of that is going to be probably a pretty bad joke. If somebody says, hey, I've got some good news and some bad news, most of the time it's just there's really bad news and they're trying to soften it with the good news. You know that. When certain conversations are started certain ways, you know the shape and flavor of the rest of that conversation. I say that this morning because we see in the Gospel of Mark in this passage that we're getting kind of the framing of a conversation that's important for us to understand. We're given important clues to the context of all of this teaching from our text this morning that Jesus gives. Every biblical passage has a context. And it's really important to understand the context of the passages that we read. This one is not any different. We see it in the first 3 verses of our passage. The conversation is framed in a way that helps us to understand. We see what we need to know about the rest of the verses that we're going to look at. Jesus and his disciples, they passed through Galilee. But Jesus isn't doing the kind of teaching that he's been doing all throughout Mark. He's not publicly proclaiming the good news of what's happening in the world. He's not healing people. He's not performing miraculous signs. He's getting away by himself with his disciples because he wants to teach them alone. They're traveling probably as quiet as they've ever traveled before, not drawing any kind of attention. Jesus didn't want people around when he was teaching his disciples. This was time that he had set aside to pour into the 12 that were following him, to train them, to teach them, to prepare them for the future, to make sure that they were ready. Ready for what? In short, ready for a time when they would not have him. Ready for a time when they were going to have to face hard things, harsh things without him. And that hangs over this whole passage. Jesus says the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise. There's coming a time when what they have in that moment will no longer be possible. There's coming a time when Jesus is going to be killed. That this is non-negotiable. Jesus will do this. He has to do this. This is the way it's going to be played out. The Son of Man will be given over into the hands of men. He will die by the hands of men in order to save men. To fall into the hands of God is one thing. David chose to fall in the hands of God in 2 Samuel. But to be given over into the hands of man is another. It's harsh. I'm sure the disciples were confused. It may have been like a foreign language that they kind of understood what he was talking about, but really didn't delve into it. They'd been with Jesus as he had taught, as he'd performed miracles. He was popular. They saw how popular he was. They saw how people loved him. How could he be given over to men to die? Not only that, he was the Messiah. He was the king to come. And how could a king die at the hands of the people he would rule? It flies in the face of what they expect. No one expected it. No one except for Jesus. Jesus, who knew fully what awaited him, who was aware of the path that he walked, he understood it. He understood that it was spelled out in so many places in the Old Testament. But perhaps the most poignant is Isaiah 53, which speaks of the role of God's chosen servant who will suffer at the hands of man in order to effect the salvation and redemption of God's people. That's such an important passage. We have it hanging on the wall in our sanctuary, part of it. The idea that there would be this servant, this anointed that would come from God, and that he would suffer to save God's people. In history, we can see, we can look and see all the great men and women who have died in the service of helping others, but we've never seen any like the death of Jesus. Of anything, his disciples understood how great Jesus was. They'd witnessed the miracles. They'd witnessed the teaching that was not like any other teaching ever. 3 of them had actually seen Jesus transfigured just a few short verses earlier, and they had caught a glimpse of the glory of heaven shining out from Jesus, and they could fathom the power and the greatness of who Jesus was. So how could he die? Yet Jesus walks willingly towards his death because it has purpose to save mankind. He takes our pain and he bears our suffering, as Isaiah tells us. And the disciples, they can't understand it. I don't think it's because they just don't understand what Jesus is saying. I think it's that they don't understand how that can be. And all their hopes are pinned on Jesus being the king. All their hopes are pinned on the power that comes with Jesus when he comes fully into his kingdom that they're expecting him to take as he goes into Jerusalem. That he goes to Jerusalem to rule, not to die. And that's what they're expecting. And we know that that's what they're expecting because rather than asking Jesus, hey, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that you're going to die? Because that doesn't jive with the things that we're expecting. We want some power. That's why we're following you in some ways. Rather than asking him that, and then rather than, okay, maybe they're afraid to hear the right answer. But rather than being on the road and talking about it on the road, like, hey, what do you think Jesus meant by he's going to die? They don't talk about that either. What they start talking about and arguing about is who's the greatest. Oh yeah, Jesus just said he's going to die, but let's not let's not even dwell on that because we really don't want to hear that. Sometimes I'll tell my kids to do something, and they'll be looking right at me so I know they hear me and they understand, and then I'll leave and I'll come back and it won't be done, and I'll be like, why didn't you do that? And they'll say, you didn't tell us to do that. Yes, I did tell you very clearly, but you didn't hear it because you didn't want to hear it. And that's kind of this situation. They don't want to hear that, so they start arguing about who's the greatest on the road. Because there's something in all of us, something in our hearts that makes us want to be the greatest. That we get some kind of pleasure out of being better than others. And we don't say it because it's not, you don't say that kind of thing. That's not the right thing to say. It's not politically correct. It's not, we're all supposed to be humble, so we talk about being humble, but in our hearts and our minds we're thinking, but I'm better than you. But the disciples, they've got it out on display, and they're arguing about the greatness of who they are. And I get this picture of the 12 disciples walking in a line behind Jesus, and maybe Peter kicks John's legs and trips him so he can get in front of John and be right behind the Jesus. And like they're all fighting to see who's in the front of the line. Kind of like how when the little kids line up to go to lunch in school, they all fight to see who could be the line leader for the day. Like that's the picture I get. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. But they're fighting to be better than the others. Arguing over who's the greatest. People, all of us, human beings, we spend a lot of time trying to be better than other human beings. In one of the greatest apologetic books of the last century, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis titles his chapter on this kind of thing, The Great Sin. He says it's one of the greatest sins, and foundation of sin is this drive to be better and to be above others, to want to be first, to want to be above others in comparison to everyone else. And he says that we all suffer from it in some way, shape, or form, and that no one is free from it, and also no one really admits it for the most part. The disciples who spent all of their time at the feet of Jesus, they're not free of it. You see, there's something satisfying about knowing you're better than others at something. Jesus says, I'm about to suffer and die. And then they argue over who's greatest. It highlights the impulse and how ugly that impulse can be in all of us. To look around, to evaluate, to judge, to rank ourselves in relation to others. Progressive Insurance has a series of commercials about how not to become your parents. Do you guys know those commercials? Do you know what I'm talking about? And there's one that I really like because it's one guy trying to start a fire with like 4 or 5 dads standing around. And the whole goal of that is to not give your advice on how this guy should start his fire. And the whole premise is everybody thinks their way of starting the fire is the best and that they are the best. And so no matter what this guy does, it's going to be bad. And that's the impulse in all of us. It may not be starting fires. It's something else that we stand around and we think, oh, you're not as good as me about that. I'm better. Oh, no. I mean, I'm humble, but I'm better at that. I'm better at being humble. Those kinds of things play in our hearts and our minds. And it takes over and it poisons us. And it's got to be rooted out. If we miss it in ourselves, it can grow, it can take over. It's antithetical to life with Christ. And Jesus points that out to the disciples in verse 35. The key to being first is being last, to be the servant of all. But even this can become a strategy for being the greatest. Because instead of fighting to see who's in the front of the line, you might start fighting to see who's in the back of the line, just to prove that you're the least. So Jesus isn't talking about a strategy. He's talking about an understanding of the world and our place in the world. We can check our understanding of the world with a test. And you know what that test is? Jesus calls a little kid, a little child to him, takes him in his arms, and he says, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. Now, we lose a little bit nowadays because we recognize how valuable kids are and precious they are. They're awesome. But back then, kids were pretty disposable. They weren't quite held in the kind of esteem that we hold them today. They didn't have value apart from what they could do work-wise, especially when young. And Jesus is saying that the way we treat those around us who society says doesn't matter is important. It's a good indicator of whether or not we're full of ourselves. So I was reminded of, whenever I'm preaching and I ask for the Lord to give me good illustrations, it's always at my own expense, and so I probably should stop praying that. But I was reminded of that this week when I stopped at a gas station to get a drink, and as I was walking in, this guy that's standing there, I saw as soon as I pulled up, and I knew what was going to happen as soon as I walked by him. He says, "Hey, can you spare some change?" And I said, I don't carry cash with me, but I'll buy you something inside if you want something." And he said, yeah, and he asked me to buy him something, and I went in and I got my drink and I got him whatever he wanted, and as I'm walking out, I hand it to him, and I got in my car and I left, and as I pull away, I got that feeling, that feeling you get when you do something really nice for somebody. You know what I'm talking about? That feeling? Well, I didn't get that feeling, not this time. Instead, I was angry. I was mad. I'd been working all day. I was hot. The reason I stopped to get a drink is I was so thirsty because I'd been sweating. And I'm like, he looked like he could work. Why isn't he working? And the assumption in my thought process was that I was better than him. It's not a good thing. But I was convicted by that. The only reason I was being mad, because I had the money to buy the little thing that he wanted, the only reason I was mad is because I felt like I was working hard and he wasn't, and I was better than him, and it was a comparison game. And at the root of it was this belief or this pride in my heart that I had to squash. Now, that's a silly example, but it's true. And we're faced with that every day, multiple times a day. Not just with people asking us for things. How do we address this? It goes back to the first few verses of this passage. Back to the suffering servant of Isaiah 53. Our sin, it cuts us off from God. Our sin wrecks us in the eyes of God. Every single one of us, to use my illustration, every single one of us are standing on the corner of that gas station. Our sin has made us bankrupt. It's driven us to be homeless. We deserve nothing. And yet God pulls up in a brand new Maserati and he gets out. And when we ask him for a little bit of change, he gives us the keys to his car. He gives us the clothes that he's wearing, and he takes our place on that corner. That's the gospel. It says we had no hope. We had nothing to commend ourselves to him, yet he stops and he gives everything. We have no chance at life, but Jesus gives up his life so that we could have one. He loved us so much that he was willing to be given over into the hands of man to suffer. When we become a Christian, we give up one way of seeing the world and pick up another way, the gospel way. See, at the heart of our life is a God who loved us so much that even at our most despicable, He loved us. And He gave Himself up into the hands of man. See, the danger of pride, the danger of that kind of comparison is that we think we're better than everyone else. We think that we are the greatest, and it begins to affect the way we think about the world to the point that it affects the way we see ourselves in relationship to God, and it starts robbing the power of the gospel. But when we welcome one of the least of this little child that Jesus uses, when we truly welcome them, we are saying that I recognize that before God, I have no greater standing than this one or that one or anyone. I'm so far down the ladder. We're so far down the ladder that we cannot possibly compete for who is the greatest because we're all so low. We are equal before God. And that should shape everything around our life. And the disciples, ever kings of missing the point, say, well, we saw this other dude casting out demons, and he's not one of us, so we told him to stop. And Jesus extends that, and He says, just as much as you are comparing yourself to others, you can't compare your group that you're in to others. They think they're the elite crew who, by the way, if you remember back, they couldn't even cast out a demon when Jesus came off the mountain. And they think that they're the only show in town, and which is the natural progression. If you think you are the greatest, then of course your group will be the greatest, and no other group will measure up. And once again, Jesus says, don't stop him. There are others who belong to me. There are others who are doing legitimate business in my name, who are helping to spread the kingdom. You aren't the only ones. Christians have it hard in this world. Bruce just shared with us this morning about some of those places where Christians have it really hard. Probably more than we can even imagine, I think. Persecution from radical Islam. Places in the world where the drinking water poisons you just as you drink to try to survive. You know what one of the greatest threats to Christians are in this country? Other Christians. Last couple years, as I've looked around at vital and strong ministries, it's the attacks of other Christians on these ministries that make me so sad. I look and daily I see other Christians attacking other Christians and dogging other Christians, and it's really, it can be kind of silly. Just this week, I was just looking just to see what kind of things are out there, and somebody was saying that John MacArthur was a heretic, that Tim Keller was a heretic, and that Alistair Begg was a heretic. All strong teachers, all who I would say would be the least likely to be heretics. And yet other Christians were just I don't know why. Because different small pieces of their theology are different than others. And so we poke and we pick and we stop. And Jesus says, no, stop. Jesus says there are others who are faithful. The hope for the world isn't this one group of people over here or over here. It isn't even a group at all. It's Jesus. It is about who we belong to. That's how Jesus frames it. Miracles in my name. They belong to the Messiah. Cup of water in my name. I love this church, Scranton. I think we're unique and special, but we aren't the only church. There are a bunch of others, really good churches, all around the city. They're doing important work. and ministries that are doing important work within walking distance of here. Because that's how God works. He's working through a vast amount of His people to affect this world because that's what's needed, because this world is so desperate for Jesus. If we spent the same amount of energy pointing the fingers back at ourselves as we do to others, man, this world would be a whole different place. Which is where Jesus takes us in the next several verses. Verses 42 through 48. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them if a large millstone were hung around their neck and they were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life maimed than two hands and go into hell. If your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. If your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. You see what he's doing there? It's really bad for you to cause another to stumble from what you've done or said. So you need to look at yourself. In the wise words of the poet, philosopher Ice Cube, you better chickadee check yourself before you wreck yourself. That's very wise words. It's kind of a paraphrase of this. It's so important to check yourself that Jesus pulls out this crazy hyperbole. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. If your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. If your eye causes you to pluck it out. Because it's better to lose those things than to be in hell. In other words, it's your responsibility to check yourself. It's not literally self-mutilate, but he's trying to get across the point of how important it is to focus on the things we do and say and think and not on others. In Matthew 7, Jesus says this, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take out the plank of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. You see how that plays back into humility? If we can't look at ourselves, then how can we ever hope to bear the burden or carry the burden for our brother or help our brother or sister? We have to look at ourselves. We examine our own lives, like John the Baptist, who said that he had to become less in order for Jesus to become more. The same is true of us. We have to die to ourselves. Jesus has to become more in our lives. So much more that we just lay everything down. That's the cost of discipleship. To follow Jesus is to be so consumed by Him that nothing else compares. Everything else takes a back seat. That's the language Mark points at in the last two verses, 49 and 50, which is really confusing for a lot of people. Because Mark is talking about the fires of hell as punishment, and then he shifts. It's almost as if he's saying, speaking of fire, disciples will be salted with fire. Everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? Have salt among yourselves and be at peace with each other. It's the language of sacrifice, salt used in sacrificial offerings, and fire that completely consumes the sacrifice. That's the whole point of the passage today. James Edwards, a commentator, says, the disciple who takes up the cross of Jesus and follows on the way to Jerusalem, who nurtures the faith and the faith of another believer, who willingly forsakes things that are injurious to the life of faith, are themselves a holy sacrifice. Romans 12, verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Our lives are to be laid out before God. And it isn't something we can do by sheer will. It's a response to what Jesus does on Calvary. It's a response to what Jesus said he's going to do. In the hands of men, he is abused and executed. And then in the hands of God, he is raised up, exalted, and sits at the God's right hand. And that shapes our lives. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this day that you've given us, for your word. I pray that you would help us to be shaped in this way. That we would be the least. That we would be last. That we would see the world in this way. Help us, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.